Hello, and welcome to another segment of Fine Arts Features, the program that highlights members of the faculty and staff of the College of Fine Arts here at Wichita State University. Today we have a special treat, a conversation with Samuel Ramey, Distinguished Professor of Opera. For over 3 decades, Samuel Ramey was the world's foremost interpreter of bass and bass baritone operatic and concert repertoire. Sam's interpretations embrace the bel canto of Bellini, Rossini, and Donizetti, the lyric and dramatic roles of Mozart and Verdi, and the heroic roles of the Russian and French repertoire. Ramey is the most recorded bass in the history of opera. His more than 80 recordings include complete opera recordings of arias, symphonic works, solo recital programs, and popular crossover albums on every major label. His recordings have garnered nearly every major award, including 3 Grammy Awards, Grand Prix du Disque Awards, and Best of the Year citations from journals including Stereo Review and Opera News. A native of Colby, Kansas, Samuel Ramey is himself an alum of Wichita State. In 1995, he was named Kansan of the Year, and in 1998, the French Ministry of Culture awarded him the rank of Commander in the Order of Arts and Letters. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Samuel Ramey. Welcome to another Fine Arts Features. This one is a particularly difficult one for me to start because how do you introduce someone who needs no introduction? Whenever you talk about Wichita State, the name Samuel Ramey is synonymous with Wichita State. Whenever someone talks about some of the most famous alumni coming out of this august institution, Sam's name is at the top of the list. It's difficult to introduce him because there are literally books about this man. And I have a particular affinity for Sam because there was a point in my life when I wanted to be Sam Ramey. The sordid underbelly of this interview, or this conversation rather, is that both of us are recovering opera singers, so to speak. But my repertoire was the same repertoire as Sam's repertoire. And I spent many hours listening to his recordings. And as you know from the introduction that you just heard, Sam is the most recorded bass in the history of opera. So, but the real true secret to Sam Ramey is that for all of his accolades and all of his fame and so forth, he is just a nice guy. I mean, he's just the most approachable person that you would ever want to meet and to know. Thoroughly Kansan in that sense. Thoroughly. So how's that for an introduction, Sam?
That sounds great. That's hard to live up to.
Oh, well, but you do a great job of doing that. So in a sense, my first question, though, is for you to tell us who you are. And for most of the people on Fine Arts Features, a lot of the listeners don't know who the person is. But in your case, if they don't know who you are, they haven't been paying attention. But how would you describe yourself? How would you say, who is Sam Ramey?
Well, I would say that I'm basically, I mean, you covered it pretty much in your introduction, that I'm a boy from a small town in western Kansas. And I've been to some quite fantastic places over my life, my career. But they always said, you you can't take the Kansas out of the boy. And I've just always felt very, I've always been very humbled with my basically my career and the places I've been. I never dreamed that my career would take me to the places that it did. But I'm always proud when I hear people that have known me for almost all my life. And there are people still around that have. And I love hearing that I've not changed, that I'm still the nice Kansas boy.
Yeah. Now, I remember once you related to me a very humorous incident. There was some young person, I think you were at some reception or whatever, and they were introduced to you, and they thought it was Sam Ramey, the movie director or something. What was that? What was that like?
Yes, the first time this happened was I was singing in San Francisco, the opera in San Francisco. I think I was doing Attila at the time. But anyway, I went after a performance one night. We went to a restaurant very near the opera house, and I remember walking through the restaurant, and I heard somebody say, "That's Sam Ramey." And I didn't think anything about it. I went to the table, and pretty soon, like a young man came to the table and said, "Excuse me, he said, are you Sam Ramey, the film director?" And at that point, I really didn't know who Sam Ramey, the film director, was. But I said, "No, I'm Sam Ramey, the opera singer. Sorry." But I have since, because it's happened a number of times
since then.
Yeah, well, actually, one of the best stories about it is I was at the Met in New York singing. Went for a performance one night. We were doing War and Peace, Prokofiev's War and Peace.
Oh, wow.
And I was being made up, and I noticed that there was a guy walking past my dressing room, and he'd look in, and finally, after I was done, he walked by, and I said, "Can I help you?" And he came in and said, "Well," he said, "this is kind of a strange request because I'm a super here, and I'm in being a super here in War and Peace." He says, "But my day job, I work for Sam Ramey, the film director." And he sent me to you to get, he would like to have a signed photo of you. He said, because he's always getting mixed up with you. People are always coming up, "Are you Sam Ramey, the opera singer?" So I was.
Well, there is, I've spent a lot of my life being jealous of you. Part of it because of the way you sing, but another part of it, now that, let's say, I am on my starting to see my more mature years, you have retained a lot more of your hair than I have.
Well.
So I don't know what's your secret there.
I don't have a secret. I choose good genes, I guess.
Good genes.
My hair looks just like my mother's did.
Well, but I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
Well, could I add one more story about Sam Ramey?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
We were, my wife and I we went to the White House. Well, we went. I was on the committee that selects the Lincoln Center, not Lincoln Center, the awards every year at Oh,
Oh, the Kennedy Center?
Kennedy Center honors, the
Yeah, yeah,
Kennedy
yeah.
Center honors. I was on the committee that selected the people for a long time, and I always got invited. So one year we decided to go. So part of it was a visit to the White House, and so we went to the White House, and we're just sort of standing around, and I was actually we were standing with Cheryl Milnes and his wife, and we looked over, and like 10 feet away from us, all by himself, standing there looking around, was Steven Spielberg.
Mm-hmm.
And so we said, well, shall we go talk to him? And so we decided to go over and introduce ourselves and talk to him. And so, we four of us walked over, and Cheryl said, I am Cheryl Milnes, blah, 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 blah. And then I said, hello, Mr. Spielberg. I'm a big fan. My name is Sam Ramey. And he's, Sam Ramey? My kids have all your DVDs.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I'm Sam Ramey, the opera singer, not the film director.
Your kids should have all of my CDs, not my
Yes,
DVDs.
They should have my CDs, my DVDs and CDs.
Well, and that kind of is a segue into something, that's a pretty impressive thing to say, that you are the most recorded bass in the history of opera. How did that get started? Tell me how you, is that because, obviously because of your fantastic voice, but it takes a little bit more than that, management and your agent,
Yeah.
and so, et cetera, et cetera. How did that come
Well,
about?
I had just just started really singing. I'd singing at New York City Opera. I made my debut there, well, just about in 1973, just about this time. It was in March.
Yeah.
And my agent at the time, one year, I think the year was, it was 1975. I'm sure he decided that I should go to Europe and do some auditions. And so I had some auditions arranged. I'd been set up with a European agent, and so he had me, the European agent. I was in London at the time.
Yeah.
And he had me. He arranged an audition for the Royal Opera House of Covent Garden. But I went in. It wasn't a stage audition. It was what they called a crush bar audition. They had auditions in the bar area of the opera house.
Oh, okay.
So they called it a crush bar audition. But at this audition was a guy named Eric Schmidt, who was the head A&R artist and repertoire guy with Philips Records at the time.
Yeah.
And so he heard my audition. He liked what he heard, and he booked me for three recordings starting the next year. My first recording was done in 1976, was it? I think it was I Due Foscari of Verdi, and we recorded that in Vienna. They had a project of recording all of the early Verdi operas.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also did that same summer Angelotti in Tosca with Montserrat Caballé and Jose Carreras.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also did a Lucia di Lammermoor recording, also with Caballé and Carreras. So that's how I got started, and it just sort of snowballed. I don't know.
I'm assuming the Raimondo or
Raimondo.
Yeah. So, talk about your recording experiences. What was the most memorable? Any of them stand out?
I would say probably the Don Giovanni recording that I did with Herbert von Karajan.
Yeah.
I think that was the most he recorded. He tried to get the feeling of a performance. So I mean, lots of recordings. You'd go in and you would do, you'd do an aria and you'd do it over and over until it was, what they thought was good.
Yeah.
But Karian, he liked to record in big chunks, big,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and to sort of help getting the feeling that it was a performance, as opposed to, it was much less dry or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
where-
More
'cause-
antiseptic or clinical. Yeah.
exactly, right.
Yeah.
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 I did a series of Bach recordings with Helmut Rilling in Germany, and we would literally take like 12 measure sections and do them 3 or 4 times. And
Yeah.
you just didn't get a good feel for the overall piece.
Yeah.
Were there any recordings that, well, maybe I shouldn't pin you in the corner and ask if there are any recordings that you regret doing or that were not satisfying, but
I really can't. I can't think of any right offhand.
okay. So you have a very unique perspective. You have been at Wichita State as both a student and as a faculty member and as a guest artist, because in between those two, you came back, you did recitals, you did master classes and so forth. So you've had a varied and unique career here at Wichita State. Tell us a little bit about your time as a student. What was it about your time at Wichita State that really made you think, hey, I can do this?
Well, that's a good question. I was my first experience in opera was I heard about the Central City Opera in Colorado, that they hired young singers to do chorus work, and there was a bit of a workshop for them. And so I went out and made a tape, sent it off, and lo and behold, they took me. This was the summer of 1963.
Yeah.
And I had already started college up the road at Kansas State University, and I had not been real happy there, but I had gotten interested in opera at that my teacher had me work on Non più andrai from The Marriage of Figaro, and that was my first exposure to opera and what it was. And I went out and found an old recording of Ezio Pinza singing it, and that was my first exposure to opera. I didn't really know what opera was. Mm-hmm. And then I heard about Central City and went out. So I went out there. So I was taking part in an opera in Central City before I'd never seen an opera performance in my life. But there were a couple of other kids in the chorus that summer from Wichita State, and so we were talking, and they said, "Oh, you should come to Wichita State. We have a really good music program, a good opera department, and you get some good." So I decided to do that, and I remember doing one of the students there that summer. Her teacher was Bud Boughton, who was the choral man
choral
here.
Director, yeah.
Yeah, and so he came out to Central City just to see performances, and I met him, and I ended up doing an audition for him. I think I sang Old Man River at the Teller House Bar in Central City.
So you did another one of those Crush Bar auditions, huh?
Exactly.
Now, Sam, I don't want to say anything, but we're starting to get a theme here about you singing in bars here.
Right.
So Bud said, "Heck yeah, come on down, huh?"
Yeah, he did. Yeah. So that would fall, I came here and started at Wichita State.
Yeah.
And I remember my audition for the opera department. The opera director in that time was a man named Robert Minzer. And so my first year we did Tales of Hoffmann, and I did Dr. Miracle.
Yeah.
So that was my first opera role in my whole life.
Yeah. Now you and I have another connection. We are two of only maybe a handful of singers who've actually done Carl Orff's Der Mond.
Yes.
I did some research. I mean, I did it back in the day, but when I came back to the States, I love the opera, and I did some research, and it's only been done like 3 times, I think, in the United States. And one of the times was here at Wichita State. And talk about that. Was that a interesting?
Yeah, that was quite a fun experience. Yeah, we did a production where they put the orchestra behind this, actually, way in the back of the stage.
Yeah.
And so with the action, most of the action took place, on the front of the stage and the pit. They raised the pit, and we used the pit.
Yeah.
And so I remember I was doing St. Peter, and my entrance there was this scene that took place in I think it took place in hell.
Heaven. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was lots of carrying on, big party scene, and all of a sudden I appeared, and they had a scrim across the stage, and I appeared. They built this high sort of platform that I had to climb up on, and my first entrance was up there. They shined a light on me, so it looked like I was in heaven.
Yeah.
So this is a very small platform. So I climbed up on arms, and I sing my first bit, and then I was to get down and walk out and onto the stage proper.
Yeah.
And so the light came on me, and it was, I was I sang, and when I finished singing, the light was supposed to go off, so it was dark, and then I would get down and find my way off of the platform. So, I finished my singing, the light went off, I got down, I was on my hands and knees trying to find the ladder to climb down.
Yeah.
And the light came back on. And I looked up, and I said, the first thing that came to my mind, I said, turn off that damn light. Which I was mic'd.
Oh yeah.
So that what I said boomed out through the whole theater. So
yeah.
I remember the dean at that time, Howard Ellis, came back after the performance and said, "Well, Sam, I think we made a little history tonight."
I don't know why that opera is not done more often than it is, because it's a beautiful, wonderful piece.
Yeah.
And particularly for an educational setting like a university, because there aren't, it's not that long. It's only about maybe 90 minutes tops.
Yeah.
And most of there's a lot of roles, and none of them are really dangerous roles. Sometimes in opera, a role can literally be dangerous for young boys. So
yeah.
Did you ever sing a role back in your youth that you thought, I should have waited about 10 years?
Well, yeah, actually, here at Wichita State.
Which one?
The title role of Verdi's Falstaff.
Ah,
That
yeah.
was the last that was my last thing that I did here at Wichita State before I left.
Wow.
And I mean, it didn't. I don't think it hurt me vocally or anything. He said, but I just
Sure.
which
Sure.
I was just too young to be doing Falstaff.
Falstaff. Yeah. It's like 22-year-old tenors trying to do uh, uh, oh gosh, now it just went out of my head. Othello.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Right.
what does a 22, 24-year-old tenor have to do with Othello? So you graduated from Wichita State. Did you gravitate immediately to New York, or where did you go from here?
No. Well, actually, yeah, I graduated the summer of 1968, and then I stayed another semester to do Falstaff.
Ah, okay.
But then I had heard about a little opera company it was based in Raleigh, North Carolina. It had at one time been called the Grassroots Opera Company,
Yeah.
and they changed the name to the National Opera Company. It was a small company. They toured in the the southwest eastern part of the United States, most to schools primarily. So I went someplace and made a tape and sent it off to him, and they hired me. So I went down there right after I finished Falstaff.
Yeah.
Another singer from here at the time, a young tenor named Don Nelson, he got into that company as well. So the two of us drove down to Raleigh, North Carolina, and we spent the spring down there. We did Italian Girl in Algiers, Don Pasquale, and La Pericole.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Wow.
toured around schools all over in the southeastern United States. So it was a good experience. We did everything. There were 10 singers and a music pianist, conductor, and a technical guy. And we would drive into town and go to the school or wherever we were performing, and we'd set up the lights. So we singers did all that work, and it was a good experience.
Yeah. So where did you go from there then?
Then after I finished that was led up to like June of 1969.
Yeah.
And then I went home back to Colby and got my things all together and took everything down to the Greyhound bus depot and got on a bus and went to New York.
Did you know anybody in New York, or were
Yes,
you?
I had a number of friends. Quite a number of singers had preceded me from Wichita State, actually. So there were a number of Wichita State former students there, and so I actually one guy from Wichita State. His name was Don Juno. He had a very nice apartment. He could let me move in, and he had a spare bedroom, and so I moved in with him for a bit of time, and until I went around, found a 9-to-5 job.
Now you actually your rise in opera was precipitated more by New York City Opera than I mean, by the time you made your Met debut, you were a world figure already, international figure already.
Yeah, I had sung at most of the leading opera houses in the world before I sang at the Met.
Yeah, which is another story. It's the Beverly Sills syndrome, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
But how did you make it to City Opera?
Well, my teacher here at Wichita State was a man named Arthur Newman.
Yeah.
And he had been one of the, shall we say, charter members of the New York City Opera when the company was founded in
Yeah.
1953.
Yeah.
So, you know, he spent like nearly 20 years, I think, or 15 years. I can't remember how long he was there before he retired and came to Wichita State.
Yeah.
But he talked about New York City Opera, and so I had sort of had made it a goal of mine to sing at New York City Opera
Yeah.
when I went to New York. And so when with my teacher and I, when we decided, I mean, my teacher in New York, Armin Boyadjian,
Yeah.
when we decided I was ready to do some auditioning, you know, City Opera was one of the places I wrote them. They would hear anybody. You just needed to contact them, and they'd have you come in. So I remember going in, singing an audition. It was in the orchestra room of the State Theater,
Mhm.
and a terrible place to sing.
The
But
State Theater.
yeah, well, the orchestra room was, because it was
Oh.
lined with acoustical tile. So
Oh.
it was a very dry audition, I remember. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's sort of a screening. You know, they would hear you there, and if they liked anything they heard, they would call you and have you come to and sing on the stage.
Yeah.
So eventually, I did hear from them, and well, I ended up singing, I think, 4 or 5 stage auditions.
Hmm.
And nothing happened.
Yeah.
And I was working at my 9 to 5 job at the time, and I had a very understanding. My boss was a big opera fan, so
Yeah.
whenever I needed to take off for an audition, he was very, very willing to let me go.
Yeah.
So one day I was at work. This was in 1972, I think. Yes, it was. Um, and I got a call from New York City Opera saying that they would like to hear me that afternoon. Yeah. And so I ran up and told my boss I needed to leave, and so I went home and vocalized, and I went down, and that was the audition that got me into the company. So I made my debut in March of 1973. As Zuniga in Carmen was my debut. My
Ah.
first season, I think, was, I had a very small contract. They gave me a contract for 2 performances of Zuniga in Carmen and 1 performance of Don Alfonso in Così fan tutte.
Well, they obviously liked what they heard and what they saw.
Yeah,
So what really thrust you into the limelight was your debut with Sills in the bel canto, was it Attila, or the I'm trying to remember the one where you just literally burned the stage up with the Fioritura, that you did.
no, that was my Met debut with Marilyn Horne.
Oh, okay. What but you and Sills and were involved in kind of a revitalizing of the old Baroque opera. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, Sills was pretty much responsible for that. With her, they did the City Opera did this fantastic production of Julius Caesar,
Yeah,
and with it was done primarily for Beverly,
yeah,
and that's what made her a big star.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
um, but I hoped that they would ask me to do that, a revival of that one sometime, but they never did ask me to do it.
Oh, okay. So Is there any, I know this is, and I'm almost going to apologize for the question because you've probably been asked it so many times. Is there any one particular role that you have an affinity for, that you think of as your signature role, et cetera?
Well, yes, I think over the course of my career, I sort of got identified with doing the devil parts.
Yeah.
From from the four villains in Tales of Hoffmann, to Mephistopheles and Gounod's Faust, Boito's Mephistopheles. Um, the New York City Opera had a fantastic production of that, which they had done for
The Boito.
Norman Treigle.
Yeah.
So I remember I had done, I think it was in 1974, I think it was 1974. I had done at City Opera. I did my first Don Giovanni there, and I did my first Mephistopheles and Faust, and I did Henry VIII in Donizetti's Anna Bolena. So I had, some fairly good, important bass roles, and I remember one day Julius Rudel, we were in the hall, and he took me aside and said, he told me, he said, you've done some really good performances of some really important roles, and we were just thinking that we would like to revive our production of Mephistopheles for you. Would you be interested in that? And of course, I said, yes, of course I would. I had seen that production.
Yeah.
I had seen that production, several times with Norman Treigle, and I just hope that one day I would be able to. Not that I would ever have fit in Norman Treigle's shoes, but
well, I think you fit into them quite nicely.
Well,
so you have had a lot of firsts. Let me ask you, what was the last thing that you did for the first time?
The last thing I did, actually, it was not too long. It was here in Wichita with the Wichita Grand Opera. I did Benoit and Alcindoro in La Boheme. For the first time. I had never done those roles before.
Okay. Speaking of Wichita, you've had a number of performances. You've come back and done things, but in my time here in Wichita, I know I saw you do a Tosca at Century 2, and I believe you, you also did a Mephistopheles in Faust.
Yeah.
But probably the role that you've done here in Wichita that has caused the most, I'll say, national attention and so forth, was the Bluebeard's Castle that you did with the symphony. Talk a little bit about that and the Chihuly glass and so forth.
Yeah, well, that opera, I remember when I was a student here at Wichita State. I remember going down to a music store downtown. It doesn't exist anymore, but I don't remember. But they had they had some LP bins in there, and I was going through there, and I came across this recording of, and I'd never heard of the opera, Bluebeard's Castle, Bartók's Bluebeard's Castle, and it had, the singers were Rosalind Elias and Jerome Hines. And I bought that, and I used to listen to it all the time, and I used to say, I hope I get the chance to do this piece someday. So eventually I was offered I did a number of concert performances. It was done in concert a lot. But then then I got an offer to do a double bill in with the Los Angeles Opera of Bluebeard's Castle and Johnny Skiki. So
Two
I
very
did that.
different roles.
Yeah, so that was very successful and everything. But then when I came to when I my early first year here at Wichita, or first or second, I can't remember, but early in the time when I came to Wichita on the faculty here, the symphony called me. What's his name?
Don Reinhold.
Don Reinhold called me and or got in touch with me and said, we'd like to have you do something with the symphony, and we were thinking maybe a program of American songs or something, and I had just read a review in the Wichita paper of a performance they had done of of Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra. And they'd given it a really good review and praised the piece. So I said to him, I said, I just read a review of the Bartók that you all played. I said, what about, would you consider doing Bartók's Bluebeard's Castle? And he said, well, I said, that might be interesting. And I had sung a concert in Seattle not too long before, the year before, I think. And I had been in the music director's office, and he had a piece of Chihuly on his desk.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, what is that? He says, Chihuly, this classic. And then he told me about this production that had been debuted with the Seattle Symphony of this production that they did with Chihuly glasswork as the set, basically.
Yeah. Now, so for those who don't know, Chihuly is probably the premier glass blower designer, maker, artist in the United States. And so I'm sorry, I did. Go ahead and explain them.
Yeah. So anyway, I said, actually, I said, there is a production around that I know has toured, has been done with various symphonies, and I told him about it, about the Chihuly production, and because I knew there were people in Wichita who were Chihuly fans.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he got on the phone, and they were able to raise money to get the set, and we ended up doing that production here with the Wichita Symphony. That was fantastic. It was great.
It truly was a wonderful production, and it was a collaboration by a lot of entities, and it's been one of the main cultural events, certainly in my time here. And we should have known, being Sam Ramey being involved, that it would be. So I have a question for you. In your career, you've worked with a lot of conductors, singers, fellow singers, artists, stage directors, and so forth. One of the things that really sustains you in a career are the relationships that you develop with others. I know you had a very good relationship with Marilyn Horne, for example, a very dear friendship. What are some of the other relationships that you've had over the years that you feel fortunate to have had, and so forth?
Well, I'd have to think back to my New York City Opera years. I developed a very good relationship with Julius Rudel, who was he was the general director of the opera company, but also a fantastic conductor. So, I mean, he was one of the early people, or early in my career, that really sort of took me under his wing, so to speak. So we always had a fabulous relationship, and actually, actually in a couple of days, tomorrow actually, I think it is Julius Rudell's would have been his 100th birthday.
Ah, okay. Okay.
So yeah, Julius Rudell and well then yeah, of course later came Marilyn Horn. She and I we became very good colleagues. We enjoyed working with each other. We did a lot of hand wills. She was really responsible for my Metropolitan Opera debut because of this production of Ronaldo that we did in with a Canadian festival. I can't remember the name of the festival. It took place in Ottawa, Canada.
Yeah.
So this production of Ronaldo was done, and so the Met was bringing that production, but they had somebody else in mind to do the bass part. But Marilyn insisted on having me, so that I always said I should have paid Marilyn my commission. It's
so talk a little bit about your international career. I mean, you've sung all over. How did that get started?
Well, it was. I had a very good European agent who had a lot of very good contacts. I started, small, doing. I did a number of performances. I think my first performance, my debut in Europe was with the Glyndebourne Festival. So I had mentioned that early audition tour that I went on. I did auditions there. I did for Glyndebourne, and they hired me to do Figaro and the Reg's Progress. And it just sort of started from there actually, and later came the bigger houses. I started in my first German theater was the Hamburg Staatsoper in Hamburg, and then came my La Scala debut in 1980, I think. Yeah, also as Figaro, and it just sort of bloomed from there.
Okay. Do you have a favorite composer that you feel they composed for your voice?
Well, I don't know if I have one composer, but I have a group of composers. Mozart, Verdi, and Rossini were the main staples of my repertoire. So
yeah.
I got with Rossini. I got involved. It was when I made my Met debut at La Scala with Figaro, and the Rossini Festival called me. They had just started this Rossini Festival in Pesaro, which is Rossini's birthplace.
Yeah,
and they called me and asked me to come and do La Gazza Ladra, and I wasn't available. So they said, well, maybe we could look to next year, and so they asked me to come the next year to do L'Italiani in Algeri, which I went there to do. And I ended up going there for several years in a row, like I said, L'Italiana in Algeri. Then I did Il Turco in Italia. Then there was this opera that they discovered. They always knew it existed, but nobody had ever found the music to it. It was Il Viaggio a Reims, and it's a funny story because Philip Gossett, who was a Rossini sort of
scholar.
Well, he was, yes, I mean, he was a specialist in 18th century Italian opera,
Yeah.
but he was very much involved with the Rossini Festival, because what they did was they would do critical editions. They had a group of musicologists there, and they would do a critical edition of an opera and then do a production of it. So, but he used to go to the libraries all over, and there was this library in Rome that he would go to do research every year.
Yeah.
And he was there in the library one year when he said this woman who worked in the library just came up to him and had this big stack of stuff. She said, "We just found this back in the stacks and we think you might be interested in it."
Yeah.
He opened it up, and it was all the original manuscripts of Il Viaggio a Reims.
Wow.
So that's how that came to pass.
How do you check that out with your library card?
Yeah, right, exactly.
So you have had this wonderful career, and the foundation of it was many of the things that you learned at Wichita State, and then now you have returned to Wichita State, and you've been working with our students for a number of years. Talk a little bit about that. I know you've done a couple of productions for us, and I know you've mentored and taught and trained a number of our students. How have things changed from when you were a student to now?
Well, I think the school, the music school, has taken. It seems to me much more of an interest in performance.
Yeah.
When I was a student here, it was. I mean, they did performances, but I remember I came here and I enrolled in music education. And but then after my first semester, I think, or maybe my first year, I don't remember, I decided that I wanted to major in performance.
Yeah.
And I went to my advisor was Howard Ellis.
Yeah.
And so I went to him and I talked to him about it. He said, we don't really recommend to our students that they do performance degrees, because if you do education, then you have something to fall back on, and blah 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 blah. But anyway,
yeah.
But
been there, done that.
Yeah. But it just seems to me that the university is as interested in. I mean, they're still interested in music education and putting, training teachers, but at the same time, they are very interested in producing good singers, good performers, and I think that was the big change that I think that I took place since I was a student here.
Yeah. Now I'm going to reveal one of the secrets to Sam Ramey, and that is that he had the good sense to marry his wife, Lindsay.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about how you and Lindsay met and your marriage and so forth.
Well, we met in 1994. Lindsay was in the chorus of the Lyric Opera of Chicago, and I went there to do it was a production of Boris Godunov that I had done in Geneva. Had been my first Boris Godunov, and so they brought that production to Chicago.
Yeah.
And Lindsay was in the chorus, and I remember that my entrance in one scene, I walked in this, and the chorus was on stage, and they sort of made a path for me, and I walked, and there was this one girl. Their costume had most of their face covered.
Yeah.
And and but I would look at this one soprano. I gathered a soprano, and she had the most beautiful eyes, these big blue eyes.
Yeah.
And just that's how we met.
Okay. So you've been married how long now?
We have been married. It will be. I'm thinking.
I'll give you a hint.
It will
Your
be.
son
It
is
will be.
graduating from high school this year. So.
No, we will have our 19th anniversary this coming June. So.
Ah, okay, okay. So, so now you work with young singers, young artists. If you had a magic wand and you could give them some advice that you knew would stick, I mean, you and I have both been around long enough, and we have taught, mentored, trained enough students that some of the things that you tell them just kind of goes in one ear and out the other, and some of it sticks. But if there was one piece of advice you could give to a singer, what would it be?
Languages.
Mm.
I always regretted that when I was, in my training years, that I didn't spend more time with languages and become,
Sure.
So that's one thing I always say, concentrate, really concentrate on languages.
Yeah. Do you find the nuance of one language compared to another impacting your actual vocal production?
Well, I mean, I of course, most singers will say they love to sing in Italian. But
Yeah, because it's very
we
forward,
we all love, sing in Italian. But my teacher and I have talked about it, and my teacher always felt that the French language worked so well in my voice. He said it was something about the language that brought my voice much more forward and much more ringing, and so I don't know. I loved singing in French. It was certainly one of my favorite languages in which to sing. So. But yeah.
Oh. If you could have an unlimited amount of something, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. Oh. Of course, the first thing that comes to my mind is money.
Yeah.
Wow. Unlimited. I'm at a loss.
Money's a pretty good answer, right? Other than Lindsay agreeing to marry you, what is the best thing anyone's ever done for you? And by the way, I should add, I have an inordinate amount of respect for your wife because, first of all, she is a fantastic person, but also she is a very, very excellent voice teacher in and of her own right.
Yeah.
She's on the faculty as well.
Yep. She helps me a lot at that. And I love listening to her talk about singing, and she's very smart, very brilliant.
If there'd been anything other than music and opera that a path that you might have followed, was there anything else that you ever think about? Would have been interesting if I'd done that.
Well, I always enjoyed theater, and I always sort of have. I always have been interested in acting, and I thought maybe I would like to have done theater at some point, but
You know what? You mentioned that, and I just have to throw out one of my favorite performances of yours is a performance where you never even sang. It was our Johnny Skiki.
oh yeah.
Tell people about that.
Yes, Alan Held, our opera director here at Wichita
Yeah.
State, when we did Johnny Skiki, he wanted me to do Buozo, who was the guy. He sort of invented a scene for Buozo before he croaks.
Yeah. Well, it's for those who don't know, the basic plot of Johnny Skiki is this very rich guy is found dead in his bed, and all of the relatives descend upon the house to try to claim their part of the inheritance and so forth and so on. And Johnny Skiki is someone that they bring in to kind of plot and scheme to circumvent the will.
Yeah.
So basically you were the dead body.
Yeah.
And
Alan,
Alan,
he invented a little scene before the opera began.
Yeah.
Where I came on stage and actually died on the stage.
Yeah, you had this great death scene to start the opera. It's
Right.
usually just the opposite, you know. It takes me a whole act to die. It took you only 2 or 3 minutes to die in the very first scene. Sam, unfortunately, fortunately, I could go on and on and on. Unfortunately, we have gone on and on and on, and this has just been wonderful for me. I hope you have enjoyed it as well.
Certainly have.
Is there anything any parting wisdom, any comments that you'd like to tell the people who are listening or viewing this?
Well, my wife said something to me this morning. The part you had a question about something in my obituary.
Yeah.
And my wife said, "Well, you'd like to be remembered as a devilish angel."
Okay. Yeah. That is sort of an irony to Samuel Ramey. You are best known for all these devil parts, but as I have said on this this Zoom cast, you are one of the nicest people I think I have ever met. You truly are. There's this misnomer about opera singers. They talk about someone being a diva. Well, yeah. That's a bit of a fallacy. I know in my experience, and speak to your experience, most of the people you've worked with have been pretty common sense, let's get this done, pragmatic people, haven't they?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Certainly Marilyn Horn, who's a very dear friend of mine, and if you want to talk about a diva, she is a diva, but she certainly does not when you meet her, she does not come across as a diva. She's just a very down to earth, wonderful lady.
Yeah. And most of the people I think that I know I've worked with, and I'm assuming you've worked with, are exactly the same way. It is a profession where teamwork is involved, but the teamwork involves you knowing your role, your part, and doing it the best you can.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Sam, again, this has just been such a joy and such a pleasure. And Wichita State has been blessed to have you as a student. We've been blessed to have you as a returning conqueror of opera. And we've been triply blessed to have you and Lindsay return and to join the faculty and impart your wisdom, your experience, your insights to our students. And I know the students anecdotally to a person have talked about how wonderful it is to work with you and to be impacted by you, and as a person, as an artist, as a singer, as a musician. So, Sam, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh,
Thank
it
you.
has been our pleasure and our privilege. Thank you.